Hi, everybody. This is Radio Free Mormon, back for more of General Conference. It is now Saturday afternoon. It's 4 o'clock p.m. or approaching 4 o'clock p.m. in Utah, where they're having the General Conference. And I wanted to tell you that I've watched everything. I've made a bunch of notes. And this was perhaps the worst session of General Conference I have ever seen in my life. I mean, this morning session, it was okay. It was sort of a mixed bag. It had some good points, it had some bad points, and we went over those. This really is horrible. Sometimes people talk about the toxic perfectionism in Mormonism. Well, if you wonder why it is or how it is that Mormons seem to, as a people and as a religion, suffer from this idea of toxic perfectionism, perhaps more than other people in other religions, this session of General Conference will answer that question for you, no doubt about it. It brought it home to me in a way that I could not comprehend otherwise as well than watching this session. So let me go to my notes here. And let me say this first thing, okay? I was contacted during General Conference, well, by a number of people, but one of them, who I believe is in a position to know, texted me that Jared Larson, the little guy who got up there in the morning session of General Conference, the manager of the church auditing department, that this is the report I received, okay? That he, not only is there all those problems that I mentioned in the morning session when I was covering it, that about the 20 years of the SEC scandal and all the fraudulent behavior that the church was engaging in to keep the amount of U.S. security secret from the government as well as from its own members so that they keep paying tithing. Yeah, and people such as him have been coming forward every General Conference to tell us that everything's wonderful in the finances of the church, right? Okay, I went over that. But the intel I got is that Jared Larson may indeed be one of the people who signed off on those phony 13F documents for the phony 13F shell companies, the 13 of them that the church was using. I don't have time to go into the details of all that at this point. If you know what that means, then you know what that means. It's not good. It's bad. If that's true, it would be a felony, and it would also be a violation of accounting ethics since he is a CPA. To do something like that knowingly, which of course he would have to know because he's a CPA, right? He would know it was fraudulent. Once again, if this is true, an example of obedience to the church trumping obedience to anything else, whether it be to the criminal law of the state of Utah or perhaps the federal laws of the state of of the United States with the SEC, as well as your own personal ethics for your profession. And you know something? If all that's true, and I got a feeling it is, to have that same little squirt stand up there and tell me everything is up and up with the finances of the church like he did this morning really sticks in my craw. All right. So once again, we're doing Radio Free Mormon this conference weekend like a telethon, like the Jerry Lewis Labor Day telethon. But instead of the Jerry Lewis Labor Day telethon, it's the Radio Free Mormon General Conference weekend telethon, where we seek to find a cure for Mormonism. So during the telethon, we don't have a bank of people on phones that you can call into on a phone number that you see below your screen. Instead, you've got to go to radiofreemormon.org. That's org, radiofreemormon.org. Click on the donate button and make a donation, if you would, during this time period while I am on the air covering General Conference this week. And not only today, but also tomorrow. You know how it goes, all 5 sessions. It's a long day's journey in tonight on General Conference weekend. But make a donation, hopefully a monthly donation, if you can, a recurring donation, I think they call that, or a one-time donation. Whatever you can afford would be great. Your contributions will go toward finding a cure for Mormonism. And there's millions of people out there still that suffer from Mormonism. Won't you help? Let's talk about who. Oh, no, I got to talk about something else. I'm sorry. There's a lot of prefatory comments I have to make. I'm still waiting to find, like I mentioned last episode, waiting for a talk about not harming your kids if you think they're possessed by demons. That didn't happen in the second session. Sorry. Or this thing that Elder Renland, Remember a week ago, he said there's something big coming for women, or he'd hinted at it within the bounds the Lord has prescribed, but we've got to do something. And it's like they were going to come up with something. Elder Renland speaks in this session. And so we were all anticipating, is this going to be the big announcement for women and, the big stride forward that the church is going to take? No, he didn't talk about women at all. Okay. So we'll see, because he only speaks once in general conference. You get one go at it, and he didn't talk about it. So I'm not sure what he was talking about. Maybe we'll find out later. Now, when the person presiding, it was Elder Ulysses Suarez is presiding. Okay. He's an apostle, but they can do that now. They're changing things up recently where apostles can preside. It doesn't have to be a member of the first presidency. But the narrator, and I think it was Ulysses Suarez saying this, he talked about that there will be speakers. No, this was the narrator as it's opening, right? And they got the voiceover, welcome to the, 195th annual. Yeah. But he says, with speakers selected from the leaders of the church. And that caught my ear, because I'm pretty sure every time I've heard it before, they talk about distinguishing between the priesthood officers and the auxiliaries. I think that's where they do that. But if that's the place now, they're changing that and combining the men and the women into leaders of the church. So that's just a passing observation. I think I got that correct. By the way, President Nelson is still at home, and Elder Ulysses Suarez tells us that, President Nelson is watching from home. And once again, Elder Suarez has to say that President Nelson asked him to conduct this session. Remember, that was said at the morning session as well by Elder Oaks. Everybody who's conducting has to make sure that the audience knows that President Nelson asked them to conduct this session. I mean, as if somebody might think Elder Suarez suddenly went rogue and is commandeering the entire general conference for his own nefarious purposes. No, he's got to make sure it's okay. President Nelson told me to. The choir sings. Sing Praise to Him is the name of the song. The opening prayer is given. And first up is Elder Neil L. Anderson, who is, after this talk, rapidly approaching my least favorite apostle. Wow. These are stories, okay? What ends up happening is he gives a whole bunch of stories. He gets us off on this toxic perfectionism train with a bang by telling a bunch of stories of people doing superhuman things in a godly way. And what they end up being, as every good Mormon knows, is they are representative and symbolic of what it is that we're supposed to aspire to, this absolute perfection. It almost becomes laughable, except it's so horrible here as these stories progress. So, Elder Neil L. Anderson. Oh, and this is an anti-abortion talk. I don't remember hearing a talk given over to the subject of abortion in some time. I can't recall one, but that's what this is. This is an absolute beginning to end anti-abortion talk from Neil L. Anderson. He tells a story about some parents. Oh, who was it? They were members of the church, and then they left the church for a while. Some parents, and they have a daughter. So they leave the church. They come back. There's no details about why they leave the church, by the way. They never quite get into those. And no details about why they come back to the church. But they do come back, and the daughter's the thing, because apparently while they were away from the church, the daughter picked up some bad habits and ended up getting pregnant. That's what the story's about. So then the daughter gets pregnant, but doesn't get an abortion, even though her boyfriend wanted her to. And please note that in this story, it's kind of the parents' fault that the daughter got pregnant, because, they left the church for a while. They kind of let their guard down, and that's when it happened. The ward. Now, this is the main message here. Okay. First off, the girl didn't get an abortion. That's the main message. Second part is the ward was there to support her. They helped her out. There's casseroles. There's all sorts of things. Now, once again, I said this is an anti-abortion talk, and it may cause some controversy here in the future. It may be already causing controversy. I think that the controversy isn't so much to me what he's saying, because I think that what he's saying is just the handbook of the church. I mean, we know what the church teaches, right? It's not customary to hear an apostle give a whole talk on it in general conference, but I don't think he's changing the rules any from what we've understood it to be for decades, since I joined the church, at least. The part that I find objectionable, or I should say most objectionable, is the stories that Elder Anderson uses to support his talk. Oh, right. And he encouraged people in different wards as he's speaking in general conference, Elder Anderson does, that if you've got a single pregnant mom in your ward, okay, then you need to support her and help her out. Like this other person was helped and supported. And I'm pretty sure he mentioned financially. Yeah, you need to be ready to help this person in your ward financially. Every time I hear that, it doesn't sound good coming from an apostle of a church that has around $300 billion. Yeah. So, in spite of the fact that all of you people in the ward are already paying tithing and your fast offering and anything else we can get out of you, you also need to help out this kid because we just don't have the money. Oh, wait, except for all of your money. That's what we got. Elder Anderson now is just reading out of the handbook what it says about abortion. And like I say, it's pretty much what it's always been. The question I have is, why is Elder Anderson speaking on this subject? It's not that common, like I say. So I expect there's some reason going on behind the scenes as to why it is that he's speaking on this subject. By the way, I hope this isn't what Elder Renland was talking about. I put that in my notes as I was going along about, something special for women. Because no, this is going to be definitely, do not get an abortion. Do not get an abortion, no matter what, really. He talks about the exceptions. He mentions them, the health of the mother, health of the baby, these kinds of things. But then he tells stories that contradict the exceptions. In other words, those are exceptions where a woman could choose to have an abortion, right? But when he brings up a story that has an exception, such as the health of the child, and we'll get to that story. No, it's not a story about a woman who uses that and uses the guidance of the church to decide, I will have an abortion here. No, they go ahead and have the child, regardless. Yeah, that's another aspect of these stories. They only support one side of the equation and never the exception side of the equation. So the exceptions sort of become somewhat meaningless in this story, even though they are enunciated. All right. Now he reads a letter from a sister in the church that he received. Apparently, he's always getting these letters from sisters in the church. I can't tell you how many times he begins his talks, Elder Anderson, with getting letters from sisters in the church. They seem to find him very noteworthy. So he gets a letter from a sister in the church who tells the story, the sister does, about her getting pregnant when she was 17. Well, she prayed, and she knew she had to put her daughter up for adoption. So she knew she had to have the baby in the first place. Okay. No abortion. But she also knew she needed to put the baby up for adoption. This story then is festooned with spiritual language at this point to give the message that this is what you should probably do too, because God likes it so much. He likes it when you have babies and gives them up to abortion, to adoption, to members of the church through the LDS adoption services. So that's what God likes. And the end of the story is she had the baby and it was adopted by a righteous Mormon couple. So happy ending. Now there's going to be a third story. And as I'm going through these, again, instead of furiously typing, I see the first story is about a single mom, got pregnant, boyfriend, had the child, raised the child, did not adopt, certainly didn't abort. None of these people abort. And, but raised the child themselves. That's a good story. Second story is about young woman, 17, gets pregnant, has the child, but then gives it up for adoption. That's good too. Okay. We just don't see any stories about them actually choosing abortion. And now the third story, and this is where he's really, really going over the line. I thought he was going over the line here at this point, because now he's going to talk about, as difficult as this is, a woman who is a member of the church, she's married. She gets pregnant. Her unborn child is diagnosed by the doctors with Down syndrome. And not only is this unborn child diagnosed with Down syndrome, this unborn child also has heart problems, which, if the child is born, is going to require multiple surgeries while this child is still a baby. And who knows if they're going to work. So God tells these parents, because of course they're going to make it a matter of prayer, right? Well, God tells these parents that this kid, this specific kid who's not born yet, really wants to be born and really wants to be part of your family. Time after time, the mom and the dad go in for the wellness checks. Still not born yet, still pre-birth. And time after time, the doctors continue to advise her and counsel her. It would be the best idea to abort this baby. Okay? For you, for them, your health may not be in danger. Okay? It's not mentioned in the story, so I am presuming that's true. Your health may not be in danger, but this is going to change your life for the rest of your life. And that's the best outcome if the child lives through all the heart surgeries. But no, Elder Anderson tells us, nope. The doctors told them they should probably have an abortion, but time after time they righteously refused. And then we find out the child was born 1 week ago today. And that's kind of where his story ends. That's where another story is going to be beginning. But that's where his story ends. And I wrote some real big expletives down here, which I cannot say. But one of them starts with JFC. You are an effing menace, Elder Anderson. Nobody should listen to what you have to say, least of all women. Because every time he tells one of these stories, the message is, go and do thou likewise. This is what you need to do in order to be right with God. And then, as I was writing down that F-bomb laden comment, I write this because he continues to talk even as I typed, right? I said, oh, Jesus, he's now talking about, oh my gosh, I thought he had gone as far as he could go with that story about the Down syndrome baby with the heart problems and the heart surgeries, which they're probably scheduling if he hasn't even already undergone one. A week ago, he was born. Okay. Then he tells another story. You're going to love this one. I said, oh, Jesus. Now he's talking about a husband. So this is a husband and a wife. They're Mormons. They're married. They got a family. And the husband steps out on his wife. And the husband, with his mistress, she gets pregnant. And the mistress now is going to have an abortion. And I'm not making this up. This is the story he told. I swear. And somehow in the middle of this, the wife gets wise that her husband's no good and finds out about this baby that he has fathered with his mistress. And a communication ensues between the wife and the mistress. I know it sounds unlikely, but an apostle said it, so it's got to be true. And what the wife says to the mistress is, don't abort the baby. And the mistress says, well, I'm going to. And the wife says, no, don't do it. And if you don't do it, and if you take that baby to term and give birth to that baby, I will take that baby from you. I will raise that baby with my children. And I will continue to be married to the son of a bitch who put me in this position. This is the story without the son of a bitch part that was told by Elder Anderson in General Conference. After all those other stories to fill us with toxic perfectionism, now he gives us this one. Even Jesus wouldn't do what this woman did in that story. But this is the kind of metric, the kind of measuring stick that Mormons are put up against time after time after time, and women most of all. It's bad for the men. It's even worse for the women. And these are great stories to show exactly how that happens. Elder Anderson is giving examples of harmful behavior as ideals that people should follow, that members of the church should follow. This is what I find so concerning about this particular apostle and why it is that I think today he became my least favorite of all. Let me know what you think about Elder Anderson in the comments, and if you have a least favorite apostle. Now, Stephen J. Lund who is the outgoing Young Men's general president. They all got released. They're doing this thing where they release them effective as of August. So everybody who gets released in August, and the new people getting called in August, I think is how it goes. So they have this time when they switch. But Stephen J. Lund, very tall individual, and the Young Men's general president. Oh, yes. He's going to talk about the Aaronic priesthood, of course. But the first thing he did, which is unusual, I wonder if they'll keep this in the clip or if you'll have to see the entire general conference, the entire session for 2 hours to watch him do this, because Elder Anderson is just getting done at the pulpit. And Stephen J. Lund now walks up behind him, and Anderson hasn't left the pulpit yet. And Stephen J. Lund I think he puts his hand on his shoulder. Maybe he didn't, but he whispers to him, easily pick upable by the microphone. It's a total hot mic moment, right? He thanks Elder Anderson for that wonderful expression of priesthood power. And I thought, that's the weirdest thing I've ever heard. I've never heard somebody go up to somebody who just gave a talk and call it this is priesthood power talking. And this is a wonderful expression of priesthood power. And Elder Anderson, I don't think he said much in return. He was just trying to get his stuff together and get off the stand so he could go sit down. But then Stephen J. Lund starts to talk, and then I get it, because he starts talking about priesthood power. In other words, the line that he told to Elder Anderson was not spontaneous. It was a total setup. It was the way he was introducing the talk that he was going to be giving about priesthood power. Yeah, that's what I said. I said, what an odd thing to say. Oh, wait, I get it. He's going to talk about priesthood power. There is a link, which means his comment to Elder Anderson wasn't spontaneous at all. It was completely calculated, because he was going to be talking about priesthood power anyway. LOL. So at this point, you can take a nap, because he talks about priesthood power. It is the usual pablum that goes with that subject. You can recite it in your sleep. Then he gives this long story, okay? And this wasn't a horrible story. This is a long story about some curmudgeon. I think he's a guy, he hasn't been a member of the church, but he lives in the neighborhood. And these young deacons, right? Young men's presidency members are always talking about the deacons. And the deacons, the 12 to 14-year-olds in the church, they sort of took him under their wing or made him a project and did stuff over at his house. And he would cuss them out and blah, blah, blah. And of course, they kept going back because they're deacons. And eventually he starts to like them. And then he starts considering them close. And his kids, he starts thinking about them that way. Nothing untoward happens in the story. Don't worry about it. But by the time they're priests and getting ready to go on their mission, then they ask him, you mind if we practice our missionary discussions on you? And he says, okay, well, I won't change how I believe and everything, but you can practice. So, of course, he listens, he believes, and he's going to get baptized. Now, hang on a second here. Okay, I want to stop at this point in the story, because it's kind of a nice story in one way. On the other hand, because you got these young kids who are like befriending this older man who'd probably be very lonely, and he's like the kid who lives next door to Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone. Nobody ever visits him. And so he's got some kids paying attention to him. So that's a nice thing. That's a good thing. Unfortunately, several years later, we find out what we knew all along, at least if we're Mormons, was that really this friendship and taking care of the lawn and helping out with this and that, there's a goal in mind. There is a what do you call it when it's underneath? There's it'll come to me eventually. But there's a goal that they are trying to achieve that they're not telling him about. I know everybody out there in the comments are yelling it. What the word for this is. But the goal is obviously to get him to join the church and to get him baptized. And that's why they started doing this when they were 12 in the story. And it's what they successfully accomplished by the time they were priests. They finally got him to listen to the missionary discussions and join the church, which, I don't know. To me, it takes that story and it makes it a little less nice. Ulterior motive. Yes, ulterior motive. I didn't see it. I don't have the live chat on, but that's what it is. Ulterior motive. There's always the ulterior motive that we as Mormons have. Whenever we're being nice to a non-member, it's to get him to join the church. And whenever we're being nice to an inactive member, it's to get him to come back to church. It's pretty much always the way it is. I'm sure there are some exceptions, and God bless you if there are. So what happens here with this old curmudgeon guy, right? He agrees to get baptized, so that's the good part. But apparently he's been a smoker for his whole life. He gets ill, and he gets rid of his cigarettes, or the deacons get rid of his cigarettes for him. He quits smoking, right? But it's too late, and he dies before he can get baptized. What about the priesthood? Didn't these missionaries teach him about the priesthood power to heal people? You know, there were tons of priesthood blessings that were given. That's a given. None of them worked. That's unfortunate. Once again, we're also getting sort of a General Conference death march going. We've had a number of stories in the first session this morning about this kind of thing. And we're getting some more now with this poor curmudgeon who couldn't even hold out to his baptism date. However, the good news is that we got work for the dead in the Mormon church. And these boys, they were able to baptize him in the temple after he passed away. So that's a good, happy ending. Now we get another story. Oh my gosh. I remember this story. Think about this one. This goes right in the toxic perfectionism roll call. Here's a story about a bishop. He's got a 2-year-old daughter. They're obviously out having some kind of a family day. It's a Saturday. And I think that's what happens. But whatever happens, the 2-year-old daughter dies suddenly. It's devastating. You know, you ever wonder why this conference is so depressing? You ever wonder why you walk away from conference and you don't feel inspired and uplifted? You feel down and depressed? This is why. These kind of stories. So, little daughter dies, 2 years old. There's no miracle to save her. She just is gone. And of course, her dad and her mom are devastated. But this centers around the dad because her dad is also a bishop. And word spread, as word does, and everybody in the ward knows what had happened by the time Sunday rolls around, and nobody's expecting this bishop to come to church. But guess who comes to church? The bishop. He comes to church the day after his little 2-year-old girl died. Because in spite of all of his anguish and remorse indicates culpability. I'll stick with anguish. He shows up in church because he was praying the night before, and he got a revelation from God, and God told him that his priests at church need to hear his voice. So he pulls it together. He goes to church. They see him walk in. They see him walk up on the stand. He goes past the normal seat. He sits down with the priest. And then he gives that, I'm not sure if he gave the sacrament prayer or if someone else did. But the speaker went and read the sacrament prayer for both the water and the bread. Now, this is the point where it finally became clear to me, if it hadn't been before, clear beyond all disputation. This is in all capitals. Is anybody starting to understand why the Mormon church is inundated with toxic perfectionism? It is saturated with toxic perfectionism. It is super saturated with toxic perfectionism. And these kind of stories are exactly the reason why. Because they are held up as what it is we need to do. And you would have to be God himself to be able to do all of that stuff. Nobody can do that. Not honestly, not genuinely. And so when we can't, and we know we're supposed to, then bad things happen upstairs. And sometimes we need some pills to help us with that. And so there's a lot of antidepressants that are prescribed in Utah. I think it may be top in the nation. It's in the tops in the nation, at least. It is so depressing. And by the way, at this point in the Saturday afternoon session, we are only 30 minutes in, and it's this bad. Hopefully we'll be able to go a little quicker from here on out. The choir now sings, "Come hear the word, the Lord has spoken." Marquez Palmer, who I think he's an Aussie. I think he's from Australia. He has a definite accent. I keep expecting him to say, "Now that's a knife." But he smiles throughout. He seems to have an engaging personality. He talks about willows that blow down, or he had a willow that blew down. Its roots were sticking out of the ground. He went to chop it up. The neighbor comes out and says, "No, no, no. Leave that willow alone. Give it a chance. Let's stick it back in the ground. It's still got a little bit of root in there." So they do, and they nurture it, and they tend to it. And guess what happens? Good, isn't it? So now, oh my gosh, this is Elder Palmer. Okay. His talk is going to be given over to an invitation to those who have left the church to come back. This is kind of remarkable too. I know it's been mentioned certainly here and there. I can't remember an entire talk given over to it, but here it is. Come back to the church. And he says, for uniquely personal reasons. That's a quote. For uniquely personal reasons, some lose their testimony, he says. Of course, he's not going to go into what personal reasons. What is he talking about? Well, they're unique and they're personal. But now he's talking about all the Mormons who have left the church who are returning. Yeah, that's happening all over. I can tell you that out of hundreds of ex-Mormons that I know and thousands that I am familiar with because of podcasting, I am aware of only 2 who have returned to the church. And I'll give you their names, Don Bradley and Dusty Smith. That's it. If there are others, I'm happy to be informed. But out of all the people that I know, that's it. It's pretty much a one-way street, although there are some exceptions. And yet Elder Palmer is making it sound like, yeah, lots and lots and lots are coming back. And I don't think that's the case. And now Elder Palmer is inviting us all back to church. He's inviting me. He's inviting you to go back to church. And he gives the example of a guy who left the church, who is really sorry. Oh my gosh. Yeah. This is a guy he talks about in the story who had left the church for 15 years. And he finally comes back to church and he writes this letter about how he's really sorry he took offense 15 years ago and made the mistake of leaving the church. And he's sorry for all the people that he has hurt along the way because he left the church. You understand the message, right? Okay. That we shouldn't leave the church just because we get offended. And we should never leave the church because of all the other people that we're going to harm because of that decision. These are the bonds that Mormons are bound with by their leaders to stay in the church and to not leave. And later on, it'll certainly be to not listen to anybody else who's not a prophet or an apostle in the LDS church. Now, there's a sister. This is a separate story. A sister who talks about leaving and returning. He's talking about a sister who writes something about leaving the church and then returning. She says she could list all the reasons she left, but they really don't matter. We are never, ever going to hear from the church the reasons that people leave. You know why? Because they don't want you to know. This is the stuff they're trying to hide. This is the stuff they've been hiding for almost 200 years and the stuff that's getting out because of the internet and people are leaving now. But when they're telling the story about a person who leaves, they make it clear that the reasons that they left, those aren't important. Yeah. My parents loved me. This is the sister speaking. Her parents loved her in spite of tears, the tears they shed, in spite of the sleepless nights they had, in spite of the millions of prayers that they gave on this woman's behalf. They didn't make me feel unwelcome at home or family gatherings. And then as he reads his paper, he says, any such feelings were of my own making. Wait a second. So she was feeling unwelcome at home, and she thought it was her home and her family making her feel that way, but now she changed her mind and thinks it's her fault. The pathway was complex, she writes, and the way back was complex. So no details. This sounds like it could have been written by Austin Fife, actually. Inside joke. Also, this story is a message to the parents, right, a message to the parents of wayward children like this woman was. She writes about her parents and all the things they went through on her behalf. And she finally came back, right? Because they were faithful, because they had all the tears, they had all the sleepless nights and the millions of prayers. So if you have a child, the message is, if you have a child who's straying, you do all the sleepless nights, the prayers, be faithful, do everything you can. Eventually, they will come back like this woman did. There was a place here where it went by really quick, but it seemed to me that he was talking about very quickly rumors of young people leaving the church in large numbers. And I believe he said it dismissively. And I think he was trying to discount these rumors of young people leaving the church, assuring us that this is not the case. If I got this wrong, I apologize. I am typing at the same time as I'm listening, and sometimes I'm getting texts and doing research. But I think that that's what he said, which is really bad if that's what he said, because that would be a huge lie. Because the people who are leaving the church faster than anybody else are the young people. Then he tells the New Testament story. Oh, the where will you go story. You know, the one that ends, where will you go? Or what is it Peter saying? Where will we go? Where will we go? Thou only hast the words of life. Yeah. So where are you going to go? You got Mormonism. Everything else is terrible. Where are you going to go? We got you. You're stuck here. And he tells the journey, the story of the, I think he tells the story of the 10 virgins. Somebody told the story of the 10 virgins, and maybe it wasn't here, but it made me think of the 5 virgins, because there's 5 and 5, right? There's 5 that are wise and 5 that are not wise. And so they have to go and get oil for the lamps. And while they're going to get the oil at the 7-Eleven, here comes the bridegroom, and he takes the 5 women with him, and they go into the marriage feast, and the door's locked. So that the 5 that are not wise, the foolish versions, right? They don't get in. And I think it was Rebecca Biblioteca over at Mormonish Facebook page who put up something really funny, because they have a new statue now over there at Temple Square of the 5 wise virgins, right? And Rebecca says, well, what about the other 5 virgins? So she came up with a statue for 5 other virgins, the other virgins outliving their life and doing fun things, instead of just standing forever frozen in Temple Square. Okay. He said, he said 5 things here. The journey back isn't easy or comfortable, but it is worth it. That's right. He was likening it to this whole Willow story. And number 2, be patient as your faith and testimony grow. Don't take offense at thoughtless comments like, where have you been all these years? See, I know we're not supposed to take offense because people leave when they take offense. It's a big thing in the Mormon church that you're not supposed to take offense when people are offensive. Because you just continue faithful in the Mormon church, regardless of how offensive the church is to you and how it treats you and how its leaders treat you. But when he says a thoughtless comment, like, where have you been all these years? Yeah, that's not really the problem. That's not the thing that people really get offended by. He gives a really, really easy kind of comment to label as offensive. Number 3, you must go to church each week and take the sacrament, because that's what Mormons do. That's one of the things we do. We go to church each week and we partake of the sacrament. Number 4, we got to stay sensitive to the Spirit. And number 5 was the reason I went through these, because I thought this was really interesting. He said, the Lord knows your divine potential. He will never give up on you. All that is broken can be healed. And he said it very firmly. But then I had to remember back to what was said earlier today in General Conference, because by Camille Johnson, because he says all that is broken can be healed, but Camille Johnson already told us, but only spiritually. The emotionally broken stuff will have to wait. Oh, and the physically broken stuff too. All that stuff's going to have to wait, probably until after we're dead, but it will get healed eventually. And then I made this note about this guy. I said, man, this guy is really laying it on thick with his invitation. Please come back to the church. Please come back. And there it is, an entire talk devoted to coming back to the church. And what are they going to do? What are they going to do in the church to fix the problem that made you leave in the first place? Well, absolutely nothing. That's not part of the talk at all. You need to come back. We're not changing. You're the one who needs to change. And you need to conform to Mormonism, because that, ladies and gentlemen, is what Mormonism is all about. And it's also very much like Jared Halverson, because he came to my mind too with his message to the women that, yeah, we know we have you out there in the pews and the men are up here in the leadership roles, but you need to get back to church and suck it up and just start sacrificing some more so that you can have good stuff after you die. You need to serve us men in the church while you live. That's the message from Jared Halverson. Now we have another 70. I didn't know him before, Elder Sandino Roman. And he's from somewhere. He's a Latino. He's a very interesting fellow. He seems young, a little gray in his hair, but he's a good speaker. And he's very passionate about what he speaks about. And the thought struck me toward the end of his talk that he's like the Hispanic version of Dieter Uchtdorf. And at some points, it almost seems like he's channeling Dieter Uchtdorf. I wonder if he's a Dieter Uchtdorf fanboy, because he does seem to pattern his delivery after him. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. By the way, the last speaker will be Dieter Uchtdorf for comparison purposes. And he starts off by telling a story. I think he was a lifeguard. Anyway, he jumps into the water to save somebody who's drowning. And of course, the person who's drowning panics, grabs the storyteller, Elder Roman, by the neck, and then they both start drowning. And he's praying, and I think he said he felt a hand dragging him toward the shallows, dragging both of them toward the shallows, and saving them in answer to his prayer, which I thought that was kind of cool. That was a cool story. And now he makes it clear his talk is going to be about faith in Christ, faith in Jesus Christ. I made a couple of comments through here. He did make one interesting comment about what we have to do. You see, in most of these talks where they say what it is you need to do to get closer to Heavenly Father, to have faith in Jesus Christ, it's going to result in a certain list of things that we're supposed to do. And we all know what that list is in Mormonism, because we're told it over and over and over and over and over again. These are the list of things we're supposed to do. These are the things that good Mormons do. And it has to do with daily prayer, morning and night. There's paying your full honest tithe. There's the law of chastity. There's reading the scriptures every day. There's going to church every week. There's going to the temple. There's just doing all sorts of things. And we all know what that is. So I'm not going to go through that whole list here that he does. But when he gets to prayer, he did say it in an interesting way that I've never heard before. And I'm pretty sure he actually said the words, "Pray to your Heavenly Father as if it were the first time." That's kind of a romantic notion. Pray to your Heavenly Father as if it were the first time. Now he tells a story. Oh, this is his story, right? This is a personal story about him. And I thought this was actually a good story. And he told it well. He tells about his mom. And he just runs into the story. There's no setup, which was kind of interesting. He just says, my mom was crying one day. And he went up to her and he said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "I need you to be a good boy." And with tears, he promised her he would always try to be the best son and make her proud. It's a nice story. Now, he likens this to covenants made in the church, right? Because you are never going to hear a story that's just a nice story without making it mean something within Mormonism, right? And binding you closer to Mormonism. And the same with this story. He likens this story to the covenants made in the church. In other words, we promise that we are going to behave a certain way, the Mormon way. We're going to follow all the commandments. And so when we make that covenant, if we do it strongly enough, we will remember it for the rest of our life, and it will affect our lives, and we will conform to that covenant because we made it. That's the idea, which may be the best analogy I have ever heard on this subject. But as I think about it, although this story is a nice story, and it makes sense in certain circumstances, I think it does not take into account other kinds of promises. Promises made maybe as a young person to do things that are not so worthy, as be good and make your mother proud. Things which should be changed later in life, and not things that should be maintained for a lifetime just because you made a promise. We can give you an example. A guy who promises to be the best bank robber in the world. So should he keep that promise, or should he maybe break that promise? and change his life for the better. So keeping a promise is all based upon whether that promise is good and remains good throughout one's life, I think. But not the covenants in the LDS church. Those are covenants you got to keep for your whole life. And this is when I wrote down at the end that I said, this guy is really pretty good. He's like the Hispanic version of Elder Uchtdorf. Really, it's almost like he's channeling Uchtdorf. Then he gets done and the choir sings, "Hark all ye nations." Oh, by the way, we've got Elder Renland coming up. I need to go ahead and make that special announcement that this is the telethon. This is the Radio Free Mormon General Conference telethon, trying to raise money to cure Mormonism. If you can go to radiofreemormon.org and make a donation there, either a monthly donation or one-time donation, it would be great, and I'd really appreciate it. Your donations do keep Radio Free Mormon broadcasting behind enemy lines and do help us and our researchers in our quest to find a cure for Mormonism. So thank you for anything that you can do. Also, if you hit subscribe right now would be great. Hit like, leave a comment below, the whole 9 yards. So thank you very much for everybody who is doing that and who's watching. All right, now we get to Elder Renland. And at which point everybody was thinking, will it be about the women? Will it be about the women? Is he going to fulfill his apparent promise from a week or so ago that something is coming for women? Answer, no. No, he doesn't say anything about women. Instead, he talks about Elder Nelson because, if you're a good apostle, you lead out with a quote from President Nelson. And he talks about the second coming. They're going to go batshit crazy over at Christian Homestead. You just know it. There is a host of Mormon-related second coming, last days podcasts that groove on this kind of stuff. And they take clips of it and they put it up and they get thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of views because there are so many Mormons who are so looking for language from general authorities or even from state conferences, for crying out loud, where they talk about Jesus is coming. Now, it doesn't make any difference that the Mormon Church has been saying this for 195 years and that Christianity in general has been saying it for 2,000 years. The Mormons are really taking it serious this time. They really think that this means that Jesus is coming just around the corner. And so people are watching these podcasts. And Elder Renland, who should know this and probably does, is playing right into it with this talk by quoting President Nelson when he said, "Now is the time for you and for me to prepare for the second coming of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ." There it is, right there. People feel scared, Elder Renland tells us. And he says the best advice he can give is to follow the Savior's teachings. So we don't need to fear. As long as we're being good Mormons, we don't need to fear when Jesus comes again. And then he goes to Matthew 24 when the question is asked of Jesus by his disciples, "When will you come again?" And he takes us to Matthew chapter 25, the following chapter, where Jesus gives 3 parables in answer to this question. And then the first parable is the 10 virgins. He says that there were several things about these virgins that are in the scriptures, one of which is that they were wise. So they were wise. They had their oil with them, right? They're wise, and so they don't have to go run get their oil. I already synopsized this parable for those few of you who don't know it, because it gets brought up all the time in Mormonism. It's even got its own statue now, as I mentioned, on Temple Square. And apparently Joseph Smith may have used this parable in his own day to support his teaching of plural marriage. Got 10 virgins, got a wedding feast. Do I have to paint a picture? So they also were not only wise, but they were deceived in the scriptures. Excuse me, they were not deceived. The ones who waited and had their oil with them, they were not deceived. And so, of course, Elder Renland uses this now as a chance to talk about those in the church, right, who get deceived. Because he says the Savior knew that there would be pretenders who would try to deceive the members of the church. But he tells us, don't believe those who come without divine sanction. Don't be taught by counterfeits. So once again, listen to us. Don't listen to anybody else or anybody who says anything different than us. That's what Elder Renland says. Listen to the apostles, listen to the leaders of the church, and you won't go wrong, and you won't be deceived, which is what every deceiver has ever said in over the history of time, as far as I know. Listen to me and you won't be deceived. Said no deceiver ever. All right. Let's see. He does say we won't be deceived when we listen to the apostles and prophets, whom he calls the true disciples of Christ. Oh, also, we have to worship in the temple. So the only way to be ready for Jesus when he comes is to be a Mormon, and not only a Mormon, but a temple Mormon, because these things that he lists that we need to do to get ready for Jesus to come can only be done by temple Mormons. Therefore, I guess everybody's kind of shut out on the whole second coming thing. Parable of the talents is the second parable that's given. And we remember this one, don't we? The master gives his servants, he got 3 servants. One gets 5 talents, one gets 2 talents, one gets 1 talent. And then he comes back after a period of time, and the first one is doubled his talents, the number of them. The second one is doubled his, and the third one buried his. So he's just got the 1 talent. Here, in the context of telling this parable, he gives a story that I had not heard before from a person that I've never heard before. And I think he said it was from a fellow named Joshua, Zoshua. It sounded like a Z, Zoshua of Anapole. So some kind of ancient philosopher. And the story is told of his coming to the end of his life. And his disciples say to this fellow, Zoshua of Anapole, Master, why do you tremble? You have lived a good life. Surely God will grant you a great reward. By the way, this could be the best thing that I've heard in conference for a while. And it's not Mormon, but it's said in general conference. So his disciples say, you're coming to death. It looks like you're trembling and you're shaking and you're scared. Why are you trembling? You've lived such a great life. You'll have a great reward and God will reward you. So Zoshua says back to them, I'm worried about what God's going to ask me when I see him. Because if God says to me, Zoshua, why weren't you as great as Moses? Why weren't you another Moses? Then Zoshua knows. I will tell God, because you did not give me the greatness of Moses. And then Zoshua says, and if God should ask me, why weren't you another Solomon? Then Zoshua says, because you did not give me the wisdom of Solomon. But Zoshua concludes, what will I do if when I see God, he asks me, why were you not Zoshua? That's why I tremble. Isn't that a great story? And it came out of General Conference. I'm going to try and remember that. Now, I think that Elder Renland gives it a different spin than what I take from it, because he takes from it and uses it in a way to show that Zoshua is concerned that he did not magnify his talents that he got from God. That's what he says it means. I don't think that's what it means. I think that what Zoshua is saying is, I have to be myself. That's the difficult thing, to be ourselves. And that's why he trembles to think that God might ask him, why were you not Zoshua? Interestingly, what Elder Renland says is that Zoshua should have worked hard to become someone different than Zoshua. But that goes against the parable, and it goes against the story. No, the difficulty of the story isn't that Zoshua wasn't better or someone different when he stands before God. It's that he wasn't the same person that God created. That's what I think it is. Because sometimes being who you are is the hardest thing to do in life. And I think that's what that story gets to. But Elder Renland doesn't see it that way. He makes it about our potential. Then the third parable, the parable of the sheep and the goats. We all know this parable, right? When saw I thee hungered, or, thirsty, or in prison? And why didn't you visit me? Why didn't you give me food? Why didn't you give me something to drink? And then will I say unto you, right? Inasmuch as ye have done it unto the least of these, my brethren, you have done it unto me. That's what Jesus will say. When we're good to those who are the most powerless, the ones who are least able to do something in return, to pay us back, then we are serving God. We are doing it unto Jesus, is what this parable says. It's one of the most powerful parables in the New Testament. And he goes through that parable. And the thing that struck me about it was, how is an apostle of Jesus Christ in the Mormon church giving this parable with a straight face when he has got to know by now, if not from the church, then from the widow's mite report, that they have about $300 billion in value in the church. And he's telling this parable about we should visit those who are in prison. We should clothe those who are naked. We should feed those who are hungry. And that when we do that, we're doing it unto Jesus. I've got to tell you, this is remarkable to me, the blindness, because what I see is incredible hypocrisy. Then he tells a story about a guy named Pavo. I think it's a story, maybe it's from Sweden, from his home country. Tells a story about a guy named Pavo who goes through years of trials. This is also a nice story. It's like all the nice stories he gets in here come from outside Mormonism. Not a bad story. Pavo's a farmer. They go through years and years of trying to establish a farm. He gets married. He's got kids. And it's a rye farm. So rye fields of rye. And they make bread with it, right? But they don't have enough to make the bread they need to eat and also sell what they need in order to live, to survive. So they sell the rye, and what rye they keep, Pavo tells his wife, mix it with bark. You have to mix the rye with bark so that we'll have enough food to eat. So great poverty. But they keep doing it, they keep doing it, they keep doing it. And finally, they get to the day when the farm, through all this work and sacrifice, is flourishing. And now they would be able to eat rye bread without any bark in it. A dream come true for this family. And the wife says to him, this is how it's portrayed. The wife says to Pavo, now we can eat bread without bark. And Pavo says to his wife, no, I want you to put bark in the rye, half and half again. And the wife looks at him and says, why? And Pavo says, because the neighbor's field has frosted over. And they're going to need some rye. So, it's a nice story. I get it. You're helping out the neighbor. It could be straight out of the New Testament. The problem is that Elder Renland is telling these stories as a representative of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is violating the principles of both of those stories. Here's what I wrote down, okay? I was kind of upset, so forgive me. I wrote down, while the Spirit was on me, don't you know these words will canker your soul, Elder Renland? If Jesus were to come back, he would hang a copy of this talk around your neck and send you off to the eternal bonfire. Now, Elder Renland is promising that Jesus will come again. He's not sure when, but it will be soon. Maybe not too soon, but he's definitely coming. So there was Elder Renland's talk, and nothing about women, but a lot about the second coming. Next is a 70. I don't think I'd heard of him before. He seems to be Dutch. He has a Dutch accent. He mentioned being Dutch in his talk. His name is Elder Hans T. Boom. Got to be my favorite name for any general authority. Hans T. Boom. B-O-O-M. Yes, I'm Hans, and I'm Franz, and we're here to pump you up. Hans Boom has a story to tell. And he tells a story about a lady named Mary, so we know it's true because she's got a name. It's a very uncommon name. It's Mary. She's driving a wagon to Salt Lake, so it's a pioneer story. She goes through all of this, it's a pioneer story. Nobody gets there easy. Some people don't make it at all, but Mary makes it there. She's got her ailing dad on the back of the wagon. Finally, they get to Salt Lake, and he passes away pretty soon thereafter. She's 14 years old. Once again, these are the stories that we get told as Mormons. This story is supposed to inspire us to similar sacrifice and labors. Man, it's not easy being a Mormon. Both parents, okay. I'll bet this is, I don't even know if this is his lineage, but he shifts to his parents, right? And he says his parents had tough times during World War II. The parents met at a church activity. They got married at the burned temple. You remember, he's Dutch. They spent all their money. This is an important part of the story. They spent all their money to get to the temple and wondered how they would make ends meet, but they did. This story we hear over and over again in the Mormon church because we are supposed to, as Mormons, get married as young as possible. The boys are supposed to serve missions, but we're supposed to get married as young as possible after that mission and start having children as soon as possible and have as many children as we possibly can, even if it's not advisable. And we're supposed to have those children and get married, even if we are not financially capable of supporting a family and children. True. And we hear stories like this in General Conference all the time, even in April of 2025, which is telling us the exact same thing through the example of this guy's parents. Yeah, they spent all their money to get to the temple to get married, wondered how they would make ends meet, but they did. Oh, and now the bishop, of course, yeah, the bishop comes to the parents, right? They're struggling parents, comes to them and asks them to contribute to the building fund. And they give all the money they had saved for the washing machine because they're washing the clothes. They're washing the clothes. The wife is washing the clothes by hand, right? They're saving money to get a washing machine. The bishop comes by, asks for contribution to the building fund, probably for church building, and they give all their money that they were saving for the washing machine. Now, remember, this is on top of tithing. This is on top of fast offering. This is on top of anything else that the church is getting out of them, in addition to their time and energy and labor. We're just talking about money here. And this is the way it used to be. Even during the time I've been a member of the church, is having a separate donation for a building fund. But yeah, this is the sacrifice that is enjoined upon Mormons by stories such as these being told in General Conference. Again, this is the perfection culture of Mormonism on full display in this session. Oh, then they get older. They have the kids grow up, and the wife falls into a long illness. This is what the sacrifice is all for, a long illness. And the husband takes care of her at home during this long illness until he can't care for her anymore. And then he has to put her somewhere else. He doesn't tell her where she goes. She just sort of has to be put somewhere else where somebody else can care for her, because obviously it gets beyond the ability of the husband to care for her. This, again, is why conference is so freaking depressing. 3 exclamation points. Oh my gosh. Then we get a little bit of Peyton Place. This wife's father. Okay, now that was his parents, right? Now he goes to his wife's parents. His wife's father, while serving as a bishop, was accused of something. He doesn't say what it was. He says it was false, but he was accused of something that got him released. And like I say, he makes sure we know it was unjustly accused. But the point is that even in a situation like this, where somebody might not keep going to church, they might get offended. This bishop kept going to church. He's not the bishop anymore. He got released because of unjust accusations. He keeps going to church because that's what Mormons do. And I actually put, gee, damn it. This is the most toxic session of General Conference I have ever heard in my life. Look at all the stories. How could any human being measure up to all of this? It's overwhelming. Now, the choir. The choir sings The Deep, Deep Love of Jesus by Barry White. And the final speaker is Elder Uchtdorf. And I thought, hooray, if anyone can pull us out of this toxic perfectionism dumpster fire, it's Dieter. Do it, Dieter. Do it. Only Dieter can save us now. Well, guess what? Dieter doesn't save us. I think this was kind of a disappointing talk by Dieter. Now, he packs a lot into this talk. He's trying to embed secret, coded messages to the more progressive and nuanced members. But he puts it in there so deep and covers it with so much, horse manure that really you can't see it. you can't see the gem that's buried in the horse manure. I think that's what he's trying to do. It's kind of like that talk he gave back in 2015, October, I think it was, General Conference, where he says that there are good reasons that people have for leaving the church. That was the gem. And the rest of it was doubts or doubts. And so all of your friends who were members of the church in your family are going, doubts or doubts. And you're going, but he also said, I have good reasons for leaving the church. And he said, no, he said, doubts or doubts. He does the same thing here, I think. Once again, this is a talk that will probably deserve further scrutiny. But he starts with missionary work. I think he's still on the executive missionary committee, so that makes sense. Talks about his wife and he traveling southern Germany with a friend, and they invite her to go to church with them. Maybe they visit this friend, and they invite him to go to church with him, and she does. And Dieter tells his story perfectly. He does a great job, because what he does in his stories is he doesn't make himself the hero. He makes himself the butt of the story. And it's very effective. And the way he does it here is they invite this woman who's a friend to go to church. It's a little branch, southern Germany. He doesn't name it, but he sits there and he talks about how this woman is very intelligent. She's very educated, and he's actually anxious taking her to church and hoping everything's going to go right and nothing's going to blow up like it can do. So he goes to sacrament meeting and he's talking about how he was very embarrassed because the choir was not good and the kids are unruly and they're making noise and the speakers weren't very good either. He says, they tried their best. He's got to say it in a nice way, right? But that's what he's getting across. And he is just really, really feeling uncomfortable. Like, what is his friend thinking? What have you gotten me into with this Mormon church branch thing you brought me to? And then he said, I hoped, hang on a second. This is a great line. And he said it great too. Here it is. He said I sat uncomfortably through the meeting, hoping Sunday school would be better. It wasn't. That was a good line. But now the talk gets worse, unfortunately. Of course, what's going to happen? We know what's going to happen. Dieter Uchtdorf tells stories, and we know what the end is from the beginning, but he tells them wonderfully. And the end, of course, is he gets in the car, they're heading home, and he opens his mouth to start to apologize to this friend about how awful church was and let her know that really it's not that bad everywhere, and this little branch should not be considered to be representative of the church as a whole. Everybody's dying laughing because that's them. Everybody can identify with Dieter. You see, he represents himself as the average member, and he speaks truth in that way. And that's why people relate to him. He's not busy always pretending to be perfect like most of the other GAs. And this is one of the reasons he connects with people. But he says, I was going to explain this. And then before I did, though, the friend says, oh my gosh, that was so wonderful. That was the most wonderful experience I've ever had. And it was charming and everybody loved everybody. And there's people from all sorts of different backgrounds. And, she couldn't stop saying nice things about the church. And I'm not sure, did she get baptized? Maybe I'll come to it in my notes, but that's not the point. The point is that you ask, because he's wanting to get people to ask people to come to church. And you don't have to worry about, it being not appealing, that your investigator is going to love it just like his friend did, right? That's the message. But now he goes to a strange place because he starts talking, and I wish I had the transcript in front of me. So let me give you the gist of this. He starts talking about going to church and feeling comfortable at church and feeling accepted at church. And it seems pretty obvious to me that he's speaking coded language mostly about LGBTQ plus individuals. So I don't believe he mentions anything about that. But he's talking about people feeling uncomfortable and unwelcome at church. And he tries to get people to understand who are in that position that wards are made up of people and the people are not perfect, but the wards can still be perfect. And he likens that to the mistakes of men. And I think he gives a wish sort of that they would be better. But the main part is that even if you feel unwelcome at church, you are supposed to still keep going. That's the underlying message. He likens it to when he was a boy, Germany, and they had to move, and he went to some place, I'm sure, that didn't speak German, and he had an accent, and for various reasons, he was made fun of as a child. That was when he was 12. And he felt lonely and displaced, and I'm sure he did. He's trying to empathize with people who feel lonely and displaced at church, like he did when he was 12. I'm not sure this equivalence is helping, though, because even though I can understand that he felt that way, it's not the same. It's not the same kind of thing as a person who is being made to feel that way by church members because of their sexual orientation or whether they're trans. This is a problem, and it's a problem in the church, and it's a problem that Dieter Uchtdorf is addressing, but I've got some issues with how he's addressing them, frankly. He says, God looks on our inward parts, and we are all children of God, no matter what we look like or what we think or our sexual orientation. I listened very carefully when he was giving us those lists of things, all the differences we have that God doesn't care about. I don't think he got to that. But no matter what we look like or think in this life, God looks on our inward parts. And now he's going to, sadly, basically start making excuses for how the church treats LGBTQ plus people, blaming it on the people in the local ward. That's what he's doing. He's blaming the individual members in a local ward as opposed to the policies of the church he represents. That's where the problem is. Yeah, there's individual problems elsewhere. The fundamental problem is the policies of the LDS church that treat LGBTQ plus people and members as second-class citizens in the LDS church. That's the problem. That is the root of the problem. Talking about members in wards, that's striking at the leaves of a problem. I think it was Thoreau who talked about for every 100 men striking at the leaves of a problem, there's one striking at the roots. The root is the church policies, not the individual members. And Dieter's talking only about the individual members and not talking at all about the church policies. I think that's a problem. Then it's like he's picking the worst ideas from fellow apostles. Elder Bednar, he goes to Elder Bednar. Remember when Elder Bednar was talking about there are no homosexual members of the church? Well, thank God Dieter doesn't say that. But Elder Bednar was saying that as part of his message that how we identify ourselves. We don't identify ourselves as homosexual or whatever, or we don't, or as LGBTQ or plus. We don't identify ourselves that way, right? Here's how we identify ourselves, according to Elder Bednar, as children of God, which means as Mormons, because that's a Mormon concept, because it's literal. Spirit children of God, okay? So that's our identity. That's the only identity that matters, because that's the only identity that matters to the church. Unfortunately, Elder Dieter Uchtdorf says he borrows from Elder Bednar and he uses the same metaphor, that is our identity. Then he goes to Elder Holland's talk about the choir and how we're all members of God's choir, and even though we sing different parts, we all sing out of the same hymn book, which once again means, come unto us, all you who are different, and then make yourself the same in Mormonism. You have to conform to Mormonism. All in all, it was a very disappointing talk, especially considering it came from Dieter Uchtdorf. Now, I hope that when I look at it a second time that I won't be so disappointed. Of course, it's possible I'll be more disappointed. But Elder Uchtdorf does not have to worry about being beaten up in the parking lot by the other apostles for saying something radically out of line like he did before. The choir sings True to the Faith, the closing prayer given by Sister Annette Dennis, and then it's over. By the way, tonight is the evening session of General Conference. Did I mention that this is a telethon? And that hopefully you'll go to radiofreemormon.org and make a donation there so we can continue to have our researchers try and find a cure for Mormonism. radiofreemormon.org. And click like, click subscribe. But tonight's session is the evening session. It's right now, it looks like it's about 5:05 p.m. So that will be starting here in less than an hour. At the end of that session, I'm going to go live. What has happened with the evening session? We have reason to hope. that it will not be 2 hours, that it will be less than 2 hours. Because for whatever reason, this has become like the left-handed stepchild of General Conference. And my apologies to all left-handed stepchildren out there, because it used to be something special. It was the priesthood general session. Then all sorts of problems happened with that. And women wanted to go and they weren't allowed in. And then they decided, well, we'll broadcast it so women can see it, but they can't be here. And then they made it into a women's session. And then they made it into a general session. I think it was a women's session again for a second, but then a general session. Anyway, nobody wants this session. And so they don't pack it with speakers. They don't take the same care with this session. And that's resulted in it's going short for the last several conferences in a row. Sometimes almost as short as just like a little over an hour. So what I'm hoping here is if we all get together and if we hope and pray with all our might that tonight's session of General Conference may be only 1 hour. And we'll see if that happens. We'll see if we get to any warnings about demonic possession of children. And if there's any good news about some new thing that women can do in the LDS church that women in any other church have been able to do for at least 20 years now. We'll see if that happens tonight as well. So let me go over here. Sorry, go to my other screen and say thank you so much for joining me. So there's no telling when that evening session is going to be over, but I'll go live as soon as it's over, and we'll talk about what was said there. Thank you for joining me. I'm having a lot of fun. I hope you are too. I'll see you this evening. And until then, this is Radio Free Mormon, broadcasting behind enemy lines.